Welcome to this next episode of CyberTangent, where we are honored to be joined with Tiffany Rosik. Tiffany Rosik is a healthcare business and operations consultant with 15 plus years of product and program management experience in healthcare. She has led large software deployments for both U.S. health systems and HIEs while developing high-performing project teams. Tiffany, it's so good to be with you today.
Thank you, Landon. I'm honored to be here as well.
Healthcare is such a interesting field for cybersecurity professionals. When I've had an opportunity to speak with my healthcare colleagues, here's what I've learned. Healthcare organizations are known for having a breadth of systems that they manage and administrate. They're also known for supporting legacy systems that they can't easily patch or upgrade or take offline. Tiffany, can you help us understand the technology adoption lifecycle of a typical healthcare organization?
Absolutely. Healthcare is an incredibly complex environment. And so if we look at, let's just take your hospital, your average hospital, there are numbers of departments that all have technology needs and solutions. And so they usually have about an 18-month buy cycle from the time that they start evaluating vendors to the time that they start looking at implementing the solution and budgeting for it. So cybersecurity fits into that. Honestly, it's towards the bottom. There's a big focus when they go through their life cycle or their purchase cycle on ROI, and they need to meet certain financial targets for implementing a solution.
You mentioned the 18-month buy cycle and that cyber oftentimes comes in at the end. Are there any security considerations up in the front, maybe even while a healthcare organization is evaluating different vendor options or solution options?
The security evaluation is getting better, but to the extent that they are holding their vendors accountable and partnering with their vendors on security is not as robust as you might like to see.
Do you see much headway being made? And if you can, talk to us a little bit about what you foresee being a timeline or maybe even an evolution of security being more involved throughout the technology adoption lifecycle?
Well, in order to have a more involved role in the buy cycle, hospitals need to have true security organizations or groups that are going to be held responsible or will be responsible for the security of the overall technology roadmap. That is just starting to evolve. And 2017 was a solid year for seeing increased spending in that area. And 2018, again, you'll see significant spend in that area. And as those hospitals and other healthcare organizations start to spend real money in building resources, then you'll see that flow through to the buy cycle as well.
In fact, you're taking us there. So this is perfect, Tiffany. We talked about a little bit about the technology adoption cycle and the buy cycle. How would you characterize the cyber readiness, the overall cyber readiness of a typical standard healthcare facility today?
Well, right out the door, the IT spend for cybersecurity is far greater than in other industries than it is in healthcare. You'll find a number of reports and statistics confirming that statement. In terms of cyber readiness of healthcare today, we talked about how complex this environment is. So, they have concerns around the violations. There's medical device security they need to consider. There is malware affecting their systems, as well as, we talked about the aging or the legacy IT solutions that exist. And to look at that holistically and say, what is my cyber readiness? I think healthcare across the board is low to say that they are truly cyber ready.
And I feel like I've heard that before too. Out of curiosity, what's the explanation?
Technology is just evolving so quickly that it's hard for healthcare to keep up. And that's not a problem just in your hospitals. That you can see that throughout all of the various healthcare, whether you're a provider or you're a payer or you're a medical device company. Technology is just evolving so quickly.
Okay, so you're bringing us to a good point, because I would say even outside of healthcare, without experiencing an actual breach, it's difficult for security professionals to get the rest of their organization to pay attention to and prioritize cybersecurity as an important issue and an important spend. My sense, the sense you're giving me, is that it's even more so in healthcare. How have you seen security professionals within healthcare get the attention, if you will, of their organization and say, this is important. We need to pay attention to it?
I think the industry is maturing a little bit in the sense that it's no longer okay to say, oh, we didn't know. We didn't know about cyber, or we didn't know about the effects of it. There's financial losses, there's the reputation, risk of the reputation, there's litigation, and there's also compliance and regulatory impacts on having a breach. And so just because an organization can say that we haven't had a breach does not mean that they really haven't. They just may not be looking at it. And at the same time, these organizations can't say that we didn't really know this was a risk. These risks are out there, and there's plenty of examples of them in the headlines every day to show that this has to be a priority.
Pretty much every day, you're right. Well, as we like to say, the title of our podcast is CyberTangent, and we do enjoy going on tangents on occasion. So let's take a small tangent here for a moment, Tiffany. And let's make it personal. Let's say that a dear friend of yours took over as the CISO of a hospital or healthcare facility. What are, let's say, the first 3 things that you would recommend that she do to help establish a pattern of cyber success and cyber readiness at her new company?
Well, I would actually take her through kind of a classic risk management process. So my first question to her would be, what is the relationship of the security office with the rest of the organization? How are they perceived? I think that it's really important for anybody coming into a security situation just to understand what the perception is, and then work with those organizations or those departments to strengthen the relationship, or in some cases, repair the relationship, rebuild it. The second thing that I would recommend for her would be to understand their current security operations. Do they have a SOC? Do they have a security operations center? What's the capability of it? How is the organization reporting threats through that? And what's the skill level of that? And then the very third one would be to know the landscape. So again, start to identify your systems and your solutions. What are your known risks? What are your unknown risks? And start to map out areas where you need to continue to build, whether it's personnel or it's technology solutions, to close those risks.
And I know, Tiffany, that you work in security and also in many other areas of technology. I think there's a lot of uniquenesses to cybersecurity, and one of the main ones is the fact that there is this attacker, right? As you were just highlighting the risks. In your experience, based on what you've seen, what are some of the top threats healthcare is facing today?
Well, we alluded to it a little bit earlier with how rapidly technology is advancing. So there's this concept of clinical mobility. And so that's anything from tablets to smartphones to barcoding scanners to pharmacy dispensing units, RTLS, so real-time tracking systems inside of the hospitals. And all of those things are Wi-Fi enabled or they're Bluetooth enabled. And while they increase the ability for hospital to do its work every day and increases communication opportunities, that opens the organization up to greater security threats. I think the next thing that is threatening the organization is that there's shrinking budgets. There's such a focus on quality, and that's being driven at a number of different levels. There's such a focus on healthcare quality that is actually reducing the budgets for these IT organizations to spend in areas around security. And then I think the third one, as I think about it further, is there's a number of consolidations and mergers happening in healthcare. Large organizations are coming in and absorbing smaller organizations. And I think there is going to be some challenges in closing the gaps in some of the security and even in some of the technology between the small parts of those now much bigger organizations.
So you're painting this picture of, I guess, what I've heard called digital transformation, coming as a wave through healthcare facilities, through clinical mobility, at the same time that complexity is being built up through mergers and so forth, all kind of coming together, almost the perfect storm, to use a cliche.
Very much so. It's a very good way to put it.
So for those of us within the industry, we've heard it described before that the healthcare record is the most valuable record out there for the hackers, meaning that from a financial standpoint, they're the most valuable for hackers to gain access to. And yet you're painting a picture for healthcare facilities are just on the front end of becoming aware, becoming sensitized to investing in and proceduralizing cyber best practices. Is there going to be a wake-up call, a major event that some facility is going to experience that's going to serve as a wake-up call in the industry?
Well, that's a really creative way of framing the question. I think there have been a number of wake-up calls, and I'll reference the one that's happened just this month with Allscripts having a security breach. And Allscripts is a vendor supporting a number of large healthcare organizations. And it really changes the focus around who's ultimately responsible for the security of information. When you talk about the healthcare record being the most valuable, well, valuable in terms of dollars, probably. But I think if there's a threat or somebody wants to wreak havoc, there's a number of ways to do it in healthcare. And it's not just stealing patient information inside of a record. I think there's opportunities or other areas to exploit vulnerabilities, as I mentioned earlier, around clinical mobility, just injecting chaos into the networks or the Bluetooth devices or the Wi-Fi that exists around a lot of these devices that are being used every day.
You're reminding me of a great story that I heard told just a few months ago. The CISO of a major healthcare facility was describing how he and his team, and actually he and the whole management team, were going through a risk ownership exercise. Okay. And he painted the picture, and they're going through scenario by scenario and effectively trying to determine who owned the risk in this scenario, right? And he painted the picture of a hacker gained access to the HVAC system, the air conditioning, the heating and air conditioning system within a healthcare facility where people were being cared for down in Texas in August, and turned the heat up to 100 degrees. He posed the question, okay, so in that scenario, we have lives at stake, which it's a whole different ballgame. It's not just patient records or money. It's lives at stake, number one. And number two, as the CISO, he posed the question, do I own the risk of turning off the HVAC system? Because it is still August, it is still Texas, or does the HVAC guy own the risk for that? And it was basically one of those unanswerable questions. Who owns the risk when lives are at stake in situations like that? Or is that even possible to answer?
I think it's boards and CEOs, they always talk about they want one neck in the news. I think in that type of a scenario, it's very difficult to point the finger to one person and say, you know what, you own this risk. I think security is very much a shared responsibility, and it's shared amongst the department as well as the IT group, as well as the security and even the vendor. And that's why when we go back to the question that we were talking about around what advice would I give to somebody in that CISO role around building the relationships. One of the skill sets of a CISO has to be that they are great at relationship management, because when you hit a crisis, you need to be able to leverage a strong relationship.
If you think of the security operator, the leaders, the CISOs across the scope of your clients, what do you think are some of the top characteristics that a CISO ought to have? You just mentioned relationships. What might be some others that they ought to have in order to successfully operate within the healthcare industry?
So yes, be able to relationship build. They need to be able to team build. And I'll qualify that as, they're working in a space where it's evolving. While it's a new area, it's not a completely unknown area, but you need to be able to recognize what skill sets you need to have on your team and then manage that team into a high-performing team, as well as being relationship builder amongst the various departments and vendors. And then I think another really important skill set for a CISO, you certainly have to have a technology background, but you also have to be an early adopter of technology. You need to be out there and understanding what new technologies are being developed and how you're going to be securing them ahead of your organization saying, hey, we're going to go purchase this new technology.
That's great. That makes sense. Okay, Tiffany. So as we wrap up with our conversation, maybe I can ask you to give some of your thoughts and perspective on what changes you might expect to see over the next, I'm not going to say 10 years because that's way too long of a time in our fast moving industry, but what changes would you expect to see over the next 3 years, let's say, in the healthcare industry with respect to this intersection of cybersecurity and technology and operations?
Great question. It's actually a really exciting time right now in healthcare. We are looking at some significant advancements in life sciences, in part due to the technology that we've been able to leverage. And we've got artificial intelligence, we're doing a lot of analytics, and that's bringing out a new wave or a new age of biology, if you will, and medicine. And I think that's going to give way to a new age or wave of communication. And you see that through things like blockchain. And I think blockchain could have a significant impact on healthcare in the next 3 years. But in order to do that, we're going to have, as a society, we're going to have to reconcile some of the privacy and security that we've come to know today. And that will lead us, ultimately, I think that brings us an opportunity to kind of live better, healthier lives because we've been able to leverage better biology and better technology and communications.
Well, thank you so much, Tiffany. I will look forward to checking back with you over time to see some of these things come to fruition. But in the meantime, thank you so much, Tiffany, for joining us here today on CyberTangent, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Landon. I appreciate the opportunity. Have a good day.